I still remember the sound of my daughter-in-law's chair scraping across the hardwood floor. She leaned forward, folded her hands on the conference table, and smiled as if she were offering me friendly advice. "You'll transfer the company to Ethan," she said. "Then check yourself into a nursing home." For a second, nobody breathed. My son stared at the polished oak table instead of looking at me. I looked past both of them toward the framed family photo hanging on the wall. It had been taken 5 summers earlier outside our office in Franklin, Tennessee. Margaret stood between Ethan and me laughing because the photographer couldn't get our old Labrador to sit still. She'd been gone for less than 24 hours, and somehow we were already here. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply looked at Ashley and said, "We'll wait for Harold." She rolled her eyes. "There's nothing your lawyer can change." Maybe she believed that. Maybe she had already convinced herself this meeting was just a formality. Margaret's funeral had ended only 3 hours earlier. The church parking lot was still damp from an early spring shower, and I could still smell lilies on my suit jacket. Friends from all over Williamson County had come to pay their respects. Former employees hugged me. Neighbors brought casseroles I knew I'd never finish. When I finally unlocked the front door of Brooks Industrial Supply the next morning, the building felt strangely empty. Margaret and I had started the company 23 years earlier, with one rented warehouse and an old Ford pickup that barely ran. We worked weekends, skipped vacations, and survived recessions together. Every inch of that office carried her fingerprints. Ashley arrived first. She walked in carrying coffee for everyone, acting unusually thoughtful. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Daniel," she said softly. I thanked her. For about 15 minutes, she played the part of the caring daughter-in-law. Then Harold Benson called to say he was running a little late because traffic on Interstate 65 had nearly stopped after an accident. Everything changed the moment Ashley realized we were alone. She closed the conference room door. Her smile disappeared. "Let's not drag this out," she said. Ethan shifted uncomfortably beside her. "Dad," Ashley interrupted him. "The company belongs to the next generation now." I looked at my son. He still wouldn't meet my eyes. Ashley kept talking. "You've worked hard. Nobody's denying that. But you're 60. Ethan has his whole future ahead of him." I quietly answered, "I'm 60, Ashley, not 90. She laughed. "Aren't you tired?" I didn't respond. "You'll sign everything over to Ethan," she continued. "Then check yourself into a nursing home. It's probably the best place for you now." The words hung in the room. Not because they hurt, because they came less than a day after my wife's funeral. For the first time since Margaret died, I realized grief wasn't the only thing waiting for me. Greed had arrived even faster. Just then, footsteps echoed down the hallway. The conference room door opened. Harold Benson walked in carrying his worn leather briefcase. Without saying a word, he placed a thick sealed envelope on the table. Across the front in Margaret's handwriting were 8 simple words. "Open only after my funeral and only together." Harold Benson had been our attorney for almost 3 decades. He wasn't dramatic. He didn't waste words. At 67, he still wore the same style of gray suit and carried the same weathered leather briefcase I'd seen since the late 90s. Margaret used to joke that he'd probably be buried with that thing someday. He sat down slowly, looked around the room, then rested one hand on the sealed envelope. "I assume everyone's here?" Ashley answered before anyone else could. "We're ready." Harold glanced at her, then back at me. "Daniel," I nodded. He broke the seal carefully, almost respectfully, and removed several neatly organized folders. The first pages concerned funeral expenses, charitable donations, and several personal gifts Margaret wished to leave to friends. Ashley sighed loudly. "Can we skip to the company?" Harold didn't even acknowledge her interruption. For nearly 15 minutes, he read Margaret's instructions exactly as she'd written them. She'd left money to the church food pantry she'd volunteered at every Thanksgiving. She'd donated to Vanderbilt Ingram Cancer Center in Nashville. She'd even left our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Linda Carter, enough money to finally replace the wheelchair ramp her husband had built years earlier. Listening to those pages felt like hearing Margaret's voice again. Every decision sounded exactly like her. Always thinking about someone else. When Harold finished the personal section, Ashley folded her arms. "So, now the business—" "Not yet," Harold replied. Her smile disappeared. "There are additional instructions." She leaned back in her chair. "This is ridiculous." Harold calmly reached into another folder. "Margaret asked me to provide some background first." He looked directly at me. "Daniel, do you remember asking me about updating your wills 6 years ago?" I nodded. "We both came into your office." "You did." That had been shortly after Margaret's first surgery. At the time, I assumed she simply wanted to make sure everything was organized. Cancer has a way of making people think about paperwork they'd ignored for years. Apparently, there had been much more going on, Harold continued. During that meeting, Margaret requested access to several family records. Ashley frowned. What does that have to do with inheritance? He ignored the question. She asked for birth certificates, old hospital records, and documents related to Ethan's birth. My son finally looked up. My birth? Yes, Ethan frowned. I don't understand. Neither did I, Harold admitted. At first, a strange memory surfaced. About 4 years before Margaret got sick, I'd walked into our home office and found her surrounded by old photo albums and file boxes. When I asked what she was doing, she'd smiled and said, just organizing things. Later that same week, she'd driven to Nashville without telling me why. When she came home, she looked exhausted. I asked if everything was okay. She kissed my forehead and said, everything's fine. I believed her. Now I wasn't so sure. Harold slid a yellow folder across the table toward me. Margaret began asking questions after noticing several inconsistencies in hospital paperwork. Ashley laughed. Inconsistencies from 27 years ago. Harold met her eyes. She thought they mattered. Ashley shook her head. This has nothing to do with who owns the company. It may have everything to do with it. The room fell silent. Even Ashley stopped talking. Harold folded his hands. Margaret instructed me that if anyone challenged Daniel's position in the company based on family lineage or inheritance rights, I was to continue with the next section. Ashley glanced at Ethan with a confident smile. Fine. She looked back at Harold. Let's get on with it. Instead of answering, Harold opened his briefcase one more time. From the bottom, he removed a second sealed envelope. It was thicker than the first. Across the front, Margaret had written in bold black ink, "Open only if family ownership is challenged." Ashley crossed one leg over the other and glanced at her watch. If this is another history lesson, she said, we're wasting everyone's time. Harold didn't react. He placed the second envelope on the table but didn't open it. Before we continue, he said, Margaret wanted everyone to understand something. Ashley let out an exaggerated sigh. Please. Harold looked at me instead. Daniel, your wife didn't spend years protecting this company because of the money. I already knew that. Brooks Industrial Supply had never made us billionaires. We were comfortable, sure. We had 83 employees' contracts across Middle Tennessee and a reputation we'd earned one customer at a time. What Margaret cared about was the people. She knew every employee's spouse by name. She remembered birthdays. She sent flowers when someone's parent passed away. To her, the company wasn't an asset. It was family. Ashley clearly didn't see it that way. She leaned toward Ethan. We already talked about this, she whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Once everything's transferred, we can finally modernize the place. Modernize. I knew exactly what that meant. Lay off longtime employees. Sell the warehouse property. Replace loyal people with cheaper contractors. I'd heard those ideas before. Margaret always shut them down. Ashley smiled at me. You've had a good run. I didn't answer. Ethan has an MBA. He's younger. He understands today's business. My son looked uncomfortable. Ash? No, she continued. Someone has to say it. She turned back to me. You shouldn't be making these decisions anymore. I folded my hands together. And why not? Because you're grieving. She wasn't entirely wrong. I was grieving. Some mornings I still reached across the bed before remembering Margaret wasn't there anymore. I still caught myself picking up my phone to text her whenever something funny happened. I hadn't even removed her toothbrush from the bathroom. Grief makes simple things complicated. But it doesn't make you incapable. Ashley mistook silence for weakness. She always had. Harold finally spoke. Mrs. Brooks, Ashley smiled. Yes, I strongly recommend you stop making assumptions. Her smile faded. I don't make assumptions. You've made several today. She laughed once. Fine. Then she pointed toward me. So tell him to sign. Harold slowly shook his head. There will be no signatures today. What? Not until Margaret's complete instructions have been read. Ashley pushed her chair back so hard it nearly tipped over. This is unbelievable. Ethan finally spoke. Maybe we should just listen. She stared at him. You told me your dad already promised the company would be yours. I said you'd eventually. Exactly. She looked at Harold again. So what's delaying that? Harold opened the envelope. Instead of legal forms, he removed several certified documents held together with a binder clip. Hospital records, laboratory paperwork, copies of letters. None of it looked like anything related to a business. Ashley frowned. What does any of that have to do with ownership? Harold adjusted his glasses. Everything. He picked up the first document. Margaret instructed me that if anyone attempted to claim control of Brooks Industrial Supply based on bloodline or inherited family status, he paused. I was to explain why she quietly ordered a legal DNA test 4 years ago. The room froze. Ethan blinked. A DNA test. I stared at Harold. Even I had never heard those words before. Ashley laughed nervously. You're kidding. I assure you, Harold said I am not. He broke the laboratory seal, unfolded the report, and looked down at the first page. Then he quietly said the sentence that changed every life in that room. I'm going to read exactly what the certified report says. Harold adjusted his glasses and looked around the conference room. I'll read this exactly as it was certified. No one moved. The heating system hummed softly above us. Somewhere out in the warehouse, I heard the beep of a forklift backing up. Life outside that room kept moving, completely unaware that ours was about to stop. Harold began. The DNA comparison was conducted using samples submitted under court-certified chain of custody procedures. Ashley rolled her eyes. Oh, for heaven's sake, Harold continued without looking up. The probability of a biological parent-child relationship between Daniel Brooks and Ethan Brooks is 0%. The room went completely still. I honestly thought I'd misheard him. 0. That wasn't possible. I looked at Ethan. His face had turned white. Ashley laughed a short, confused laugh. That's ridiculous. Harold kept reading. The tested individuals are excluded as biological father and biological son. Nope, I whispered. It came out before I even realized I was speaking. No, that's wrong. For 27 years, Ethan had been my son. I'd taught him to ride a bike in Pinkerton Park. I'd coached his Little League team. I'd sat through high school football games wrapped in blankets on freezing Friday nights. I was there when he graduated from the University of Tennessee. I held his shoulder when he married Ashley. How could a piece of paper erase all of that? Ethan stared at me. Dad, his voice cracked. I don't understand. Neither did I. Every memory in my head suddenly felt unstable. Ashley slammed both hands on the table. This is fake. Harold calmly placed another document beside the DNA report. It was verified twice by independent laboratories. I don't care. You should. She pointed directly at me. You planned this. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because I couldn't imagine planning something that shattered my own world. My wife never told me, I said quietly. Harold nodded. That's true. Ashley looked from him to me. So everyone expects us to believe Margaret secretly did a DNA test and never told her own husband. Harold answered immediately. She told me exactly why. He reached for a handwritten letter. This is addressed to Daniel. He handed it across the table. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unfold it. Margaret's handwriting. The same neat cursive she'd used for grocery lists and birthday cards. I swallowed hard. Danny, it began. If Harold is reading the DNA report, something has gone terribly wrong. I had to stop. I couldn't see through the tears. Harold gently continued reading for me. I prayed this envelope would never be opened. Ashley folded her arms. This changes nothing. Harold looked at her. It changes quite a bit. She scoffed. Ethan is still the son who helped build this company. I agree. And Daniel is still his father. Ashley frowned. What? Harold spoke carefully. The DNA report doesn't erase 27 years of love. For the first time since entering the room, I saw Ethan cry. Not quietly, not politely. He buried his face in his hands like a little boy. I don't know who I am anymore. Without thinking, I pushed my chair back and walked around the table. Ashley grabbed his arm. Don't. He pulled away from her. I knelt beside him. I don't care what that report says. He looked up at me. Through tears, I said the only thing my heart knew to be true. You've been my son every single day of your life. He broke down completely. Across the table, Ashley looked furious, not heartbroken. She wasn't mourning the truth. She was calculating what it meant. Harold quietly lifted one final folded page from the file. There is still one document Margaret instructed me to read. Ashley threw up her hands. What now? Harold looked directly at her. This explains why Margaret kept the DNA results secret and why she ordered your inheritance plan to be completely rewritten. I couldn't stop staring at Margaret's handwriting. Harold waited until the room settled before continuing. He unfolded the final letter and cleared his throat. I'm reading this exactly as Margaret wrote it. The room was silent except for Ethan trying to catch his breath. Daniel, if you're hearing this, I know you're hurting. I also know you're probably blaming yourself. Please don't. I closed my eyes. That sounded exactly like her. Even now she was trying to take care of me. Harold continued. 4 years ago, while organizing old medical records for our estate planning, I found several inconsistencies surrounding Ethan's birth. Ashley muttered under her breath. This is insane. Harold ignored her. At first I believed it was simply bad record keeping, but after speaking with the hospital, I learned there had been concerns about a possible newborn mix-up that was never fully investigated. Ethan slowly lifted his head. Mix-up. Harold nodded. According to the records, another baby was born within minutes of Ethan that same night at St. Thomas Hospital in Nashville. Nobody spoke. I'd lived with those memories for 27 years. Margaret in labor, the nurses rushing in and out, the exhaustion, the joy. I had never imagined there could have been a mistake. Harold continued reading. I couldn't ignore what I'd found. I hired private investigators and later authorized a legally supervised DNA test. Ashley shook her head. So she just kept this secret? Yes, Harold answered. And she explained why. He looked back at the letter. I never told Ethan because I refused to let one laboratory report destroy the childhood of an innocent boy. My throat tightened. That was Margaret, always putting people before herself. He became our son the moment we brought him home. Nothing could ever change that. Ethan wiped his eyes. I never knew. I know, Harold said gently. None of us did. Ashley stood up and paced toward the windows overlooking the warehouse. So what, none of this matters? It mattered to Margaret. No. Ashley turned around. What mattered was who owns this company. There it was. Not confusion, not sympathy, not concern for Ethan. Just money. Harold calmly reached for another folder. Margaret anticipated that reaction. He handed me a certified copy of the company's succession agreement. I frowned. I've never seen this version. You weren't supposed to. It was executed 3 years ago, Harold explained. Margaret instructed me to keep it sealed unless today's situation occurred. Ashley folded her arms. Fine, she smiled confidently. Let's hear how she left everything to Ethan. Harold looked directly at her. I'm afraid that's not what happened. Her smile disappeared. The ownership plan was completely rewritten. What? It no longer depends on biological relationships. Ashley stared at him. That's impossible. No. Harold slowly opened the document. It depends on character, loyalty, and stewardship. Ethan looked confused. What does that mean? It means, Harold replied, your mother believed a company should never be inherited automatically. Ashley laughed bitterly. This is ridiculous. Harold calmly turned another page. She wrote something else. He looked directly at Ashley before reading. If anyone pressures Daniel to surrender the company while he is grieving, that person has already proven they should never control it. Ashley's face lost all color. For the first time that morning, she had nothing to say. And I suddenly realized Margaret hadn't spent 4 years preparing to protect the business. She had spent 4 years preparing to protect me. Ashley finally found her voice. This is a setup. Nobody answered. She looked at Ethan, expecting him to jump in. Instead, he remained seated, staring at the succession agreement as if it were written in another language. Harold slid the document across the table. I'll summarize the important sections. He adjusted his glasses. Margaret transferred the majority voting rights into a family trust 3 years ago. Ashley snatched the papers before anyone else could. Then Ethan gets them. No. She looked up sharply. The trust has conditions. What conditions? Harold folded his hands. The company cannot be controlled by anyone who attempts to coerce, intimidate, or manipulate another beneficiary for personal financial gain. Ashley laughed. That's so vague. It isn't. He pointed to another page. Margaret required every major decision to be reviewed by an independent trustee. Ashley kept reading. Her confidence faded line by line. Then she reached the final page. What is this? Harold answered. Behavior clause. She frowned. Behavior clause. Margaret believed character mattered more than blood. Ashley read silently for another minute. Then she slammed the papers onto the table. This isn't legal. It has already been reviewed by the court. I'll sue. You're free to. I'll challenge everything. You may. His calmness only made her angrier. You people planned this. Harold smiled politely. No, Mrs. Brooks. Then who did? Your mother-in-law. Ashley pointed toward me. He manipulated her. I shook my head. I had no idea this even existed. She wasn't listening anymore. She grabbed her purse. Ethan. He didn't move. Ethan. Still nothing. Finally, he looked at her. What? We're leaving. He glanced at me, then at Harold, then back at Ashley. I don't think I should. Her eyes widened. What? I need to understand everything. There is nothing to understand. There is. She stepped closer. They're lying. Harold quietly placed another folder on the table. These are certified hospital records. Another folder. DNA chain of custody documentation. Another. Statements from the investigator. Another. probate court filings. Ashley stared at the growing stack. Every accusation she'd made already had an answer. Every document she questioned had been independently verified. For the first time all morning, she looked uncertain. Not guilty, not ashamed, cornered. She turned back to Ethan. Say something. He spoke so quietly I almost didn't hear him. You told me Dad was trying to steal my future. Ashley blinked. I was protecting us. You said he was waiting for Mom to die so he'd never have to retire. She didn't answer. You told me he cared more about the company than about family. Silence. Then Ethan looked at me. I'm sorry. 2 simple words. They didn't erase the last year. They didn't erase the phone calls he stopped returning or the holidays that had become awkward. But they were real. I could hear it. Ashley reached for his arm again. We're going home. He gently stepped back. No. What do you mean, no? I'm staying. She stared at him in disbelief. You've got to be kidding. I'm going to hear everything Mom wanted us to hear. Ashley looked around the room, realizing she had lost control. Without another word, she stormed out of the conference room. A few seconds later, the glass front door of the office slammed hard enough that everyone in the warehouse looked up. The silence she left behind felt strangely peaceful. Harold gathered the remaining papers into one neat stack. There is one last matter. He looked first at me, then at Ethan. Margaret's final instruction concerns who will actually lead Brooks Industrial Supply and why. Harold waited until the office grew quiet again. Through the conference room window, I could see a few employees pretending not to watch. They'd heard Ashley storm out. News traveled fast in a company our size. Harold opened the final folder. Margaret spent nearly a year working on this succession plan. Ethan wiped his face and sat up a little straighter. I don't expect anything anymore, he said. I know, Harold replied. That's one reason she believed you still had hope. He slid a single sheet of paper across the table. At the top in Margaret's handwriting were the words, "Leadership is earned, never given." I smiled despite everything. That sounded exactly like her. Harold continued reading. Daniel, if you're hearing this, I know you'll probably want to hand everything to Ethan out of love. Please don't. Not yet. I let out a slow breath. She knew me too well. Real leadership isn't inherited. It's built one ordinary day at a time. Harold lowered the page. Margaret established a 5-year transition plan. Ethan frowned. What does that mean? It means Daniel remains president and majority decision maker. I nodded quietly. And you, Harold continued looking at Ethan, returned to the operations department. The warehouse, Ethan asked. Yes. Ashley had spent 2 years pushing him toward the executive office. Margaret had quietly sent him back to the warehouse. Not as punishment, as preparation. Harold continued. For 5 years, Ethan must rotate through every department: shipping, purchasing, customer service, field deliveries, inventory, payroll, and vendor relations. Ethan actually laughed. Mom really wrote all that. Every word. I laughed too. She used to say nobody should run a company until they've unloaded a truck in August. Harold smiled. She included that sentence. For the first time all day, the room felt almost warm. Then Harold reached the final page. There is one more instruction. He looked at me. Margaret requested that this be read before the next board meeting. 3 weeks later, the boardroom was full. Our outside accountant, department managers, 2 longtime board members, people who had known Margaret for decades. Ashley walked in wearing a navy business suit, carrying a leather folder. She looked confident again. I'd like to address the board, she announced. Harold stood. I believe everyone should hear Margaret's final instruction first. Ashley folded her arms. Fine, Harold read directly from Margaret's letter. If anyone attempts to pressure Daniel into surrendering this company while he is grieving, remove that person from every future leadership discussion. Several heads slowly turned toward Ashley. No one said a word. Then Harold continued. Character reveals itself when people believe no one is watching. The silence became almost uncomfortable. One of our oldest board members, Frank Miller, leaned back in his chair. I've known Margaret since 2001. He looked at Ashley. I think she made the right decision. Another manager nodded. So do I. One after another, every board member voiced support for Margaret's succession plan. Not one person objected. Ashley looked around the room. She realized she had already lost. Without saying another word, she picked up her folder and walked out. No dramatic speech, no shouting. Just the sound of the boardroom door quietly closing behind her. I watched it shut and realized something unexpected. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt lighter. Margaret hadn't humiliated anyone. She'd simply allowed the truth to introduce itself. Autumn arrived quietly that year. The maple tree outside my kitchen window turned bright orange, just like it always had, but for the first time in months, I noticed it. Grief has a strange way of narrowing your world. Then one morning it lets a little light back in. 6 months after that meeting, Brooks Industrial Supply looked much the same from the outside. The same trucks rolled out before sunrise. The same customers stopped by for coffee before placing orders. Inside, though, things had changed. Ethan was usually the first one to arrive, not because anyone forced him, because he wanted to. Some mornings I'd find him loading pallets with the warehouse crew. Other days he was riding with delivery drivers or helping customer service answer phones when someone called in sick. He'd stopped asking when he'd become president. He started asking how things actually worked. Margaret would have smiled. One Friday afternoon, we finished walking through inventory together. As we headed back toward my office, Ethan stopped. "Dad," I looked over. "I've been wanting to ask you something." "Shoot." "Why didn't you hate me?" I smiled. "I tried." He laughed. "I'm serious." "So am I." We stood there between shelves of hydraulic fittings and electrical supplies. I was angry, I admitted. Not because of the DNA test. He looked surprised. "I was angry because you stopped trusting me." He nodded slowly. "I know, but none of that changed the fact that I watched you grow up." I put my hand on his shoulder. "I changed your diapers." He laughed. "I taught you how to drive. You yelled the whole time." "You deserved it." We both laughed. Then I said something I'd been carrying around for months. "A lab report can tell you who shares your DNA." I looked him in the eye. "It can't tell you who your son is." Neither of us said anything for a while. Sometimes silence says enough. A few weeks later, I learned through a mutual friend that Ashley had filed for divorce. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel the need to. Her own choices had already caught up with her. The company remained stable. Our employees stayed. Customers never knew how close everything had come to falling apart. One Sunday afternoon, I drove to the small lake where Margaret and I used to bring sandwiches after church. I sat on the same weathered bench overlooking the water. The wind carried the smell of fallen leaves across the lake. For the first time since she died, I didn't ask why she'd left so soon. Instead, I thanked her. Not for protecting the company, not for protecting the money, for protecting my dignity when I was too heartbroken to protect it myself. She knew the truth would hurt, but she also knew that lies built on greed would eventually collapse under their own weight. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's that family isn't measured by biology, wealth, or signatures on legal documents. It's measured by the people who choose to stand beside you when life becomes difficult. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear what you would have done in my place. And if you enjoy stories about family resilience and second chances, I hope you'll join me again next time.